So tell me, who founded the IC analysis?
Roland Wells. It was Roland Wells and Zelling Harris. So it was primarily introduced by Bloomfield IC analysis. Sentence here is segmented into parts until we reach the smallest meaningful parts. This kind of label analysis is the basis of phrase structure grammar. So this kind of labeled analysis is the basis for phrase structure grammar, IC analysis, immediate constituent analysis. Now tell me, language in terms of capital and small case.
Now, language with capital L refers to the ability to speak a particular language, and one with the small case is the abstract sense of language in the mind. Now tell me, what are the two dichotomies for classifying words?
Well, the first is open versus closed class, and the second is lexical versus functional words. So open class allow adding new words, and closed class don't allow adding new words to the language on a regular basis. So prepositions, determiners, conjunctions, pronouns, these are all closed class words. Now the other dichotomy is lexical versus functional words. Now tell me, what are constituents? What tests can help identify constituents?
Constituents are a group of words. They are a group of words that function together as a unit. And the type of tests, well, the first is test of substitution. So here syntactic components are substitutable. A noun phrase can replace a noun phrase. So that's substituting. Another test is the test of conjoining, where the same type of syntactic constituents can be joined together. A noun phrase can be joined with a noun phrase, not a verb phrase. Johnny and his mom went. So Johnny is a noun phrase here, and his mom is another noun phrase. Tell me more examples.
More examples of the test of conjoining. Well, Johnny went to market and bought a ladder. So he went to a market, that's a verb phrase, and bought a ladder, that's another verb phrase. Now the test of distribution, the third kind of test, is it says that the words that form a single constituent always occur together. For example, this little dog is mine. And another sentence using the same this little dog, which is a noun phrase. So I gave bone to this little dog. So that's the test of distribution.
And after the test of substitution, test of conjoining, test of distribution, the fourth kind of test to identify constituents is the test of replacement by anaphors, which says that the words which form a constituent can be replaced by anaphors. Anaphors like himself, herself, each other. So that sort of thing can replace a constituent. The next kind of test is the test of parenthetical insertion. It says that adverbs like unfortunately, incidentally can be inserted between syntactic constituents but not within those syntactic constituents. Now give me examples.
Well, yeah. So the examples of the test of parenthetical insertion. For example, unfortunately, those little kids saw the beggar. Now, another sentence. Those little kids unfortunately saw the beggar. Another sentence. Those little kids saw the beggar unfortunately. So, correct. The test of parenthetical insertion says that adverbs like unfortunately, incidentally can be inserted between the syntactic constituents but not within them. Now tell me, what is clause? What's a clause?
A clause is a sentence which contains only one predicate. Predicate is verb plus any phrase modifying them. So verb plus any predicate which modifies the verb. A sentence may have more than one predicate. So that's about the predicates. Now tell me, what is node? So let's talk about the syntactic, the constituents in a syntactic tree. So what are nodes?
Well, a node is every point in a syntactic tree from where a branch emerges. So somewhere, something from which a branch emerges is called a node. A node which has nothing beneath it is called terminal node. So there is nothing beneath a terminal node. And if there is something beneath a terminal node, that's a non-terminating node. Not a terminal node, but a non-terminal node. Now tell me, what is edge? Edge in the syntactic tree.
Edges are lines connecting two nodes. So it's the edge which connects two nodes. Now tell me, what is root?
Well, root is the topmost node in any given tree. That's root, topmost node. Now tell me, what are leaves? What are leaves in a syntactic tree?
Well, leaves are the words on the trees. So words on the trees are its leaves. And only terminal nodes can carry leaves. Only the terminal nodes, not the non-terminal or non-terminating nodes. So that's about leaves. Now tell me, what is dominance? Dominance.
So dominance. If a node occurs higher up in the tree in relation to other node, so that's a dominating node. So a dominating node occurs higher up in the tree. Tell me, what is precedence?
Well, about precedence, so A precedes B if A is to the left of B and neither A nor B dominate each other. So in order to, in order for a node to precede another, it needs to occur to the left of that node, and neither that node, neither the first nor the second node can dominate each other. That's precedence. Tell me, what is immediate dominance? What is it? Immediate dominance.
So about immediate dominance. Node A immediately dominates B if and only if a single edge connects A to B. So in order for a node to immediately dominate another, there has to be a single edge between those two nodes. Now tell me, what is competence?
Competence is the unconscious, clear knowledge about how to form and interpret words, phrases, and sentences. That's competence. It's an unconscious and clear knowledge about a native's language. Now tell me, what's performance? What is performance?
The actual use of language, which includes occasional slips of tongue and pauses, is called performance. So performance is the actual use of language, which includes, sometimes speakers have slips of tongue and pauses while speaking a language. So that is performance. It is an imperfect reflection of a person's competence. That's performance. Now tell me, where were these two terms introduced? Competence and performance.
These two terms were introduced in the aspects of theory of syntax. Competence and performance. Now tell me, what's I language? What did Chomsky say about I language?
So about I language. Well, I language says that, Chomsky says that language is a system that is represented in the mind of a particular individual. So that's what Chomsky said about language. It's a system in the mind of an individual. I language treats language as an internal property, and it is concerned with competence. So that's about I language. I language is concerned with the competence of an individual. I language literally means internal language. Now tell me, E language. What is E language?
About E language. So it aims to collect samples of language and describe it. It talks about performance. E language. It is physical language and is language specific. Now tell me, when did Chomsky propose the levels of adequacy, and why did he propose this? The levels of adequacy. When and why did Chomsky propose this?
Well, Chomsky proposed the levels of adequacy to judge how good the theories of syntax are. He proposed this in the year 1965. There are three types of adequacy: observational adequacy, descriptive adequacy, and explanatory or explanatory adequacy. These are the types of adequacy. Now tell me, what is observational adequacy?
Observational adequacy is not much useful. It only accounts for the data. Now tell me about descriptive adequacy.
Well, about descriptive adequacy, it accounts for the data and also gives native's judgment about grammaticality. The judgment of the native speaker about the grammaticality of a sentence. That's descriptive adequacy. Now tell me about explanatory adequacy. What is it?
Well, explanatory adequacy, it explains the child language acquisition. It the first thing is that it explains the child language acquisition. The second thing is that it accounts for data and gives natives judgment. So the second thing is that it accounts for the data. The third thing is that it gives the natives intuition or judgment about the grammaticality. So these are the three things that explanatory adequacy can do. So Chomsky's explanations fall into this category. Now tell me about innateness hypothesis. What is it?
About the innateness hypothesis. So it says that the child's brain, the brain of the child at the time of birth, is hardwired with the ability to acquire language. That's innateness hypothesis. Now tell me about the principles and parameters theory. What is it?
Well, the principles and parameters theory accounts for the similarities and the variations in all languages. Now tell me, what among principles and parameters is available in all the languages? Every language has it. What is it?
It's the principles. Principles are are the same. They operate in the same way in every child. Now tell me, what are parameters?
Well, parameters. So parameters are the points of linguistic variation, and their values are determined by the input that a child gets. So parameters then basically are the points of linguistic variation, and their values are determined by the input that a child gets. And principles interact with parameters to determine the adult grammar. It's the principles which interacts with the parameters to determine the adult grammar. Now tell me, when was this published? When was principles and parameters theory published?
Well, the principles and parameters theory was proposed in Government and Binding in the year 1981. Now tell me, what is poverty of stimulus?
Well, the poverty of stimulus is the input to the child from his environment. Poverty of stimulus basically talks about how the adult grammar cannot be explained by the the crude sort of knowledge that the child gets from the environment, and that makes up for the adult grammar. So something is broken which forms into a meaningful sort of thing. So that's the poverty of stimulus. Now tell me, who is the ideal speaker or listener? Ideal speaker listener, who is it?
An ideal speaker listener is one who knows his language perfectly and is unaffected by memory limitations and distractions. So this concept of the ideal speaker listener was given in 1965. Now tell me, what is generative grammar?
Well, about generative grammar, so it defines the syntactic structure of language with given set of rules which predict the combination of constituents which will form the grammatical sentences of a language. So it gives a set of rules which can predict what constituents will combine to make up for the grammatical sentences of a language, right? So at the now this demands the reader's intuitions. The generative grammar demands the reader's intuitions. Now tell me, at the onset of the generative program, all the rules of grammar belonged to one of which three components of grammar?
Well, the three components are PS rewrite rules, phrase structure rewrite rules, transformational rules, and the lexicon. At the onset of generative program, all the rules of grammar belonged to one of these three components: PS rewrite rules, transformational rules, and the lexicon. Now tell me, these three and the notion of surface structure and deep structure, these were the components of which theory? So which theory had these components? PS rewrite rules, transformational rules, lexicon, surface structure, deep structure.
It was the standard theory. PS rewrite rules, transformational rules, lexicon, deep structure, surface structure, these were the components of the standard theory. Now tell me, standard theory is a model of grammar, and tell me the book where it was mentioned, where this model of grammar was mentioned, the standard theory.
It's the aspects of theory of syntax. The standard theory was mentioned in the aspects of theory of syntax. Now tell me, phrase structure rules. Where was this mentioned? The phrase structure rules. What is the nature of this? What is its nature? The phrase structure. What is the nature of phrase structure rules?
So phrase structure rules were mentioned in syntactic structures. Phrase structure rules were mentioned in syntactic structures. Phrase structure rules are generative and permit recursion. So they are generative and they permit recursion. Now tell me, what are kernel sentences?
The concept of kernel sentences was inherited by Noam Chomsky from his teacher Zelling Harris. Kernel sentences are derived sentences that had gone only the obligatory transformations. So kernel sentences are those derived sentences which have gone only the obligatory transformations. Like, for example, he killed a tiger from the tiger was killed by him. That's an example. He killed a tiger here is an example of kernel sentence. Now tell me, what is lexicon?
The lexicon is the mental dictionary. Lexicon is the mental dictionary or the store of words with a specification of its syntactic category. There are two types of transformations: optional and obligatory. So optional transformations and obligatory transformations. Now tell me about the obligatory transformations.
About the obligatory transformations, so they occur whenever their structural requirements are met. Those are obligatory transformations. They occur whenever their structural requirements are met. For example, affix hopping. Now tell me, how does this differ from optional transformations?
Well, how do obligatory transformations differ from optional transformations? So Optional transformations, they occur only sometimes without any real guiding mechanism. For example, formation, passive transformation. So that's an optional. That's an example of optional transformation. It occurs only sometimes without any real guiding mechanism, whereas the obligatory transformations occur whenever their structural requirements are met. Now, tell me, what are the transformations that apply to single p markers called? The transformations which apply to single p markers.
Transformations which apply to single p markers, they are called singularly transformations as opposed to the concept of generalized transformations. So they are called singularly transformations, which is opposed to the concept of generalized transformations. That is the kind of transformation which applies to single p markers. Now tell me, what are the two parts of transformational rules?
SA or D, that is syntactic analysis or description. It specifies the sort of phrase marker to which T rule or transformational rule can apply. So syntactic analysis or description, it specifies the type of phrase to which a transformational rule can apply. So it talks about the phrase, the sort of phrase marker. It talks about that phrase marker to which a transformational rule can apply. And the other is SC, which specifies how the phrase markers are affected by the T rule. So the SC, it specifies how the phrase marker is being affected by the T rule. Now tell me an example of T rule transformation.
That's affix hopping. If there are unattached affixes which are immediately followed by verbs or auxiliaries in a P marker, that is phrase marker. So if there are unattached affixes which are immediately followed by verbs or auxiliaries. So there are unattached affixes, and after those unattached affixes comes the verbs and the auxiliaries in a phrase marker. If that happens, then attach the affix of the immediately following element as the suffix of the latter. So take out the immediately following element as the suffix and attach it to the latter. Now tell me about subject helping verb inversion transformational rule.
About the subject helping verb inversion transformational rule. So it is used to form questions. The position of the subject and the helping verb is inverted or switched. Position of the subject or the helping verb, subject and the helping verb, they are inverted to form questions. So that's the subject helping verb inversion transformational rule. Now tell me other transformational rules.
So one other kind of transformation is the not helping verb inversion. Another kind of transformation after not helping verb inversion is the to support rule. To support rule says the occurrence of tense that did not undergo affix hopping must have do inserted to its left. It refers to using do, the dummy auxiliary, to form questions or negative sentences. Another type of transformation is the passive transformations. Now tell me about that.
Well, about the passive transformations. So passive transformations, what they do is they move the subject of the the object of the sentence to the subject position. That's that's a kind of passive transformation, the explanation for it. Now, the book Syntactic Structures, it treated syntax and semantics as autonomous models. So syntax and semantics were treated as autonomous models in the book Syntactic Structures. The aspects of theory of syntax showed signs of limiting this autonomous nature. The notion of kernel sentences in the syntactic structures was reincarnated in the aspects of theory of syntax in the year 1965. Now, tell me, who authored an integrated theory of linguistic descriptions, and what did it claim?
The integrated theory of linguistic descriptions was authored by Katz and Postel in the year 1964. Katz and Postel in the year 1964 claimed that transformations held meaning constant. So, even if transformations were there, the meaning remained constant. That is what Katz and Postel proposed. So it was called the Katz-Postel hypothesis. Surface structure 1957. It says that, syntactic structures in the year 1957 said that she ate mango. This sentence, it comes from she did not eat mango by T-naught transformation. Now tell me what Katz and Postel claimed about it.
That's correct. The syntactic structures in the year 1957 said that she ate mango comes from she did not eat mango by T-naught transformation. Now, Katz and Postel claimed for this sentence to come from negative she ate mango. That was the claim of Katz and Postel. So, if this had to happen, the meaning would remain constant. So that is what the Katz-Postel hypothesis claimed. Now, tell me about the generalized transformations in syntactic structures.
About the phrase structure rules in surface, syntactic structures. So they lacked recursion. The phrase structure rules lacked recursion. They did not allow self-embedding. Generalized transformations here put together the simple structures created by the phrase structure rules to create a complex sentence. So that was the role of generalized transformations in syntactic structures. It put together simple structures created by phrase structure rules to create a complex sentence. Now tell me, where was DS, the deep structure and the concept of deep structure and surface structure, where was this introduced?
The concept of deep structure and surface structure was introduced in the aspects of theory of syntax. Now tell me, in which structure is the assignment of thematic roles done? Like where are the thematic roles assigned? In which structure are the thematic roles assigned?
Well, the thematic roles are assigned in the deep structure. Now tell me, which structure corresponds to the observed forms, including linear order? Which structure corresponds to observed forms, including linear order?
It's the surface structure. Surface structure feeds the form. Now, tell me, which structure feeds the semantic component? Which structure feeds the semantic component and accounts for meaning?
That's the deep structure. The deep structure feeds semantic component and accounts for meaning. Now tell me, which structure feeds the phonological rules and accounts for sounds. So basically, which structure accounts for sound? It also feeds the phonological rules.
It's the surface structure. The surface structure feeds the phonological rules and accounts for sounds. Now tell me, what is the role of transformations?
So the role of transformations is that it turns the deep structure to the surface structure. The deep structure and the surface structure are linked with transformations. Now tell me, deep structure and surface structure, in which model of Chomsky are these terms described? Deep structure and surface structure.
Well, it's the government and binding. The deep structure and surface structure are described in the government and binding model of Chomsky. Now tell me, what is the S structure replaced with in the minimalist program? The S structure has been replaced by something in the minimalist program. So what is it replaced by?
Well, it has been replaced by the phonetic form. The S structure or the surface structure has been replaced by PF, that is the phonetic form. Now tell me, what is the deep structure replaced by in the minimalist program? So the deep structure has also been replaced by some other term in the minimalist program. So what is that term which has replaced the concept of deep structure in the minimalist program?
Well, the deep structure has been replaced by the logical form, the LF, in the minimalist program. By logical form, LF. Now tell me, delta node and lexicon, where were these terms introduced? In which model of Chomsky the delta node and lexicon were mentioned? The delta node and lexicon.
Well, the delta node and the lexicon have been introduced in Chomsky's model of aspects of theory of syntax. So that's when the delta node and the lexicon were introduced. Now tell me, what term is used interchangeably with government and binding?
So the term that is used interchangeably with government and binding is the principles and parameters theory. Principles and parameters theory is the one that is used interchangeably with government and binding theory. Now tell me, what are the modules that have been introduced in government and binding?
So the modules of government and binding. The first is X bar theory. Second is theta theory. The third is case theory. The fourth is government and binding. That's the fourth. Fifth is the control theory. And sixth is the bounding theory. So these are the modules that have been introduced in government and binding. Now, tell me, when was the X bar theory proposed? It was Ray Jackendoff and Chomsky. They both worked on the X bar theory. Now, why was X bar theory so special? Understand this. It was special because rather than having different phrase structure rules for VPs, NPs, and other phrasal structures, it introduced two only two rules which cover all the categories of the lexical phrases. That's how it worked out. The XP, which is the maximal projection, it subcategorized for spec and the X bar, and then the X bar subcategorized for X and the complement. Okay, tell me, how does the X bar look like for an SOV word order language?
So it's basically like the complement and the head exchange places. So the XP, that is the phrasal level, it goes down to spec and X bar, just like SVO word order languages. And the X bar, here's the thing about the SOV word order languages. So the X bar goes to the complement and then to the head, which is X. So that's how the X bar tree for SOV word order languages looks like. SOV word order languages, that's how it looks like.
Okay, now tell me, so which principle determines the choice of complements? There's a principle which determines the choice of complements. What is this principle called? When was it proposed? When was this principle that could determine the choice of complements? When was this principle proposed? And what was this principle?
It was the projection principle. That this principle was introduced in the year 1986. The projection principle was proposed to determine the choice of complements. Until 1980, which categories were discussed in the X bar theory? Which categories were discussed in the X bar theory until 1980?
The lexical categories like noun, verb, and adjectives were discussed in the X bar theory until 1980. Only these lexical categories like nouns, verbs, and adjectives, but the complementizers, inflection, and determiners were not included in this theory until 1980. So complementizer, inflection, determiner, these were not included. Now tell me about DP hypothesis.
The DP hypothesis. The DP hypothesis was proposed by Abney in the year 1987. Before DP analysis or DP hypothesis, the X bar considered the spec of the NP as the seat of a determiner like the. Now, unlike English, other languages show co-occurrence of determiners and possessor. So there are certain languages, unlike English, in which we can see the determiner and the possessor co-occurring, that is, occurring together in a noun phrase. But this is not the case in English. In English, they are rather in complementary distribution. The determiner and the possessors, they are in complementary distribution in English.
Correct. So, because in English they do not occur together, so there is no slot that could project both. And hence, Abney proposed DP, that is, the DP hypothesis, which claimed that the determiner is head of nominal phrase and the noun's head of phrase, that is the complement of the determiner. So the noun becomes complement of the determiner. Now, The possessor occurs in the spec of dp, and spec of np is the position of post determiners like many, some, etc. Now tell me about the VP shell hypothesis.
The VP shell hypothesis was proposed by Larson in the year 1988. He said that the VP structure has two parts: an upper VP shell in which the slot of V is left blank, and a lower VP which is contentful. The lower VP, it is contentful with the verb. It was proposed to handle the way in which verbs which take two complements. So it was proposed for handling these verbs like give. So verb in the second VP moves to verb in the upper VP. Verb in the second VP moves to verb in the upper VP. Now tell me about the VP internal subject hypothesis.
The VP internal subject hypothesis, it was proposed by Koopman and Sportish. Koopman and Sportish proposed the VP internal subject hypothesis in the year 1991. And what happens here is that the subject originates in the spec of VP and then moved to the spec of IP by subject raising. So that's the VP internal subject hypothesis. Now tell me about C command. What is C command?
So about C command. So it's a kind of relation between two nodes wherein A C commands B if neither A nor B dominate each other. That is to say, neither A dominates B nor B dominates A. And the second condition for C commanding is that every first branching node which dominates A also dominates B. So basically, a node C commands its sister and everything below the sister. That's about C command. Tell me about M command now.
So about the M command. Well, M commands B if A does not dominate B, and every maximal projection dominating A also dominates B. So every maximal projection which dominates A is also the one that dominates B. Now let's talk about the theta roles. So agent is the person which carries out an action, and the argument acted upon is the patient, as in Ram killed a tiger. So tiger here is the patient. John killed Peter.
Recipient is the one which receives. Is the recipient. I gave the book to her. So her is the recipient here. Now the argument which describes the end point of an action is described by the verb. You know, the end point of an action as described by the verb receives the goal theta role. Like she went to the shop. So shop here receives the goal theta role.
Now some verbs like see, hear, etc., they do not denote a conscious or deliberate action. The argument in the subject position here receives the experiencer theta role, and argument in the object position is assigned theme theta role. Like Sheila saw a peacock. So Sheila is the experiencer here, and The peacock is the theme. Tell me about theta criterion. What is theta criterion?
The theta criterion. It states that the theta roles are assigned to only one argument. That's theta criterion. One argument receives only one theta role. That's theta criterion. Now tell me, what is case filter?
So case filter states that all the overt DPs must be case marked. Case marking, however, may not be overtly realized. These are called abstract case marking system. Now those that have overtly marked cases have morphological case system. Now tell me, what happens if there are more than one potential case assigners?
So in the case where there are more than one potential case assigners, so in this case it is also called potential governors, two or more case assigners. So in this case the closest one wins out. Now transitive verb and preposition assign accusative case to their complements. The subject assigns nominative case. The subject gets the nominative case from finite I. Now this was explained by Sportish in the year 1988 by the subject gets the nominative case by spec, head, or the specifier and head agreement. That's how the subject gets the nominative case. Now tell me about the case assignment of non-finite IP.
Case assignment of what?
Tell me about the case assignment of the non-finite IP.
Well, the non-finite IP is assumed to be incapable of assigning case to its spec position, which is accusative case marked mostly by the prepositional complementizer. So for him to go to Delhi is not possible. Note, for here is there to satisfy the subject requirement of the non-finite IP. Remember, there's a principle which says that no sentence can exist without a head. So that is how the non-finite IP gets, it is case marked, the subject of the non-finite IP. Now tell me, what is this phenomena of marking of the subject of the non-finite IP with case called? What is it called?
This phenomena of marking of the spec of the non-finite IP with case is called exceptional case marking. It states, the exceptional case marking ECM states that the non-finite IPs are not barriers to government. Thus verbs can govern the spec of the non-finite IP and assign case to the subject of the noun phrase of the non-finite IP. Verbs like believe, know are ECM verbs. There are also some verbs like want, expect, I believe, which are ECM verbs. Now an example, so she believes him to be the real hero. That's an example of an ECM sentence verb with what is government.
What did you ask?
I said, tell me about government in the case of ECM verbs. How does government work here?
So, about government in the case of ECM verbs, A governs B here if and only if A is a governor. The second thing is that A should am command B. And the third thing is that no barrier intervenes between A and B. Maximal projections are barriers. That's the fourth thing. Maximal projections are barriers. Governors govern everything within its maximal projection, but not anything outside it. So governors can govern everything that is within their maximal projection, but they cannot govern anything outside the maximal projection in which they are in.
Tell me, what does the control theory of government and binding deal with? What does it deal with? The control theory of government and binding.
Well, it talks about the empty subject pro, that is the big pro. Big pro, which is written with capital alphabets.
Now, before going into big pro and small pro, tell me, what are expletives?
Expletives are not assigned thematic roles. For example, there comes the queen. There has no role in this sentence. There comes the queen. Come is intransitive and takes only one argument. But I think intransitive can take no argument. Who comes? The queen comes. But I think the only question that can be asked in the case of transitivity is what. So what happens next is that the available theta role is assigned to the other argument, that is to the queen. There acts as a subject in accordance with the extended projection principle, which states that all clauses must have subject. There, it. These act as subjects in such cases. These subjects are called expletives or pleonastic subjects. Now tell me about small pro.
Small pro?
Yes.
Well, small pro is basically the non-overt subjects that are placed in finite clauses. So you have a finite clause and a non-overt subject. The languages that have this property are majorly pro-drop languages. These are pro-drop languages. The nature is minus anaphoric. The nature of this non-overt subject, the small pro, is minus anaphoric plus pronominal. Small pro occurs in governed positions only. It must be present in the deep structure as it is assigned external theta role of the predicate. Languages that have rich inflection system are often pro-drop languages as the content of the subject can be recovered from the inflection.
Tell me about big pro now. Big pro.
The null about the big pro. So null pronoun subject of a non-finite clause is big pro. It also exists in the relation to the extended projection principle. For example, she tried to solve the problem. The second clause, which is to solve the problem, has no subject, thus violating the extended projection principle. Now, verb in this sentence is transitive, and if it assigns all the theta roles that it has, problem would be marked for 2 theta roles, violating the theta criterion. This is solved by assuming that there is an abstract pronoun-like element in the subject position of the second clause, which is referentially dependent on higher subject. Now, elaborate this point, can you?
Yeah, I can. So, if the verb here is transitive and if it assigns all the theta roles that it has, then the problem would arise for, it assigning 2 theta roles, which violates the theta criterion. And this is solved by assuming that there is an abstract pronoun-like element in the subject position of the second clause, which is referentially dependent on the higher subject. The higher, that is the subject of the first clause. So such null pronouns that are believed to occur in the subject position of a non-finite clause are called big pro. For example, where would this happen in the sentence? The following is the example. So she tried pro, big pro. She tried big pro to solve the problem. So that's it. Tell me about pro theorem now. What is pro?
About the pro theorem. So big pro, it says that the big pro can never occur in ungoverned positions. It can only occur in the governed positions. It can never occur in the subject or the object position of a finite clause. So basically it can never occur in the subject or object position of a finite clause. That is pro theorem. Tell me about controller now. What is controller?
So about the controller, the element that fixes the reference of the big pro is called the controller. It can either have controlled reference or arbitrary reference. The big pro can either have controlled or arbitrary reference. In the case of controlled reference, it is either the subject or the object of the sentence, and it also depends on the verb. So depending on the verb, the subject or the object can control the reference of the big pro. For example, John promised Bill to leave. John and big pro before the non-finite clause are indexed. And the second sentence, John persuaded Bill to leave. So Bill and the big pro are co-indexed in this case.
That's correct. John promised Bill to leave. So John and the big pro are co-indexed in this case. And John persuaded Bill to leave. Bill, in this case, Bill and the big pro are co-indexed. That's correct. Now tell me about the binding theory.
Well, it regulates the referential features of the noun phrases. The binding theory regulates the referential features of the noun phrases. Now tell me about the principles that are involved in the binding theory. The principles in the binding theory, principle A, B, C, tell me about those.
Now talking about the binding principles, so the first is principle A, which talks about the anaphors. And remember, reflexive pronouns are also anaphors, and this was asked in the examination, so you better remember it. Anaphors should be bound in their governing domain as per the first principle, which is principle A. And as you can see in the sentence, anaphors must be bound in their governing category. The principle B states that the pronouns must be free in their governing category. They do not they obligatorily need to be free in their governing category. As you can see that and this principle C talks about our expressions. So our expressions must be free everywhere. Now tell me about binding.
What about binding? Binding, well, it's a relation between two nodes wherein node A binds node B if and only if C commands B and A and B are co-indexed. This is the relation, the binding relation. Tell me about co-indexation now. What do you mean when you say that A and B should be co-indexed? What is co-indexation?
Well, co-indexation refers to the phenomena of giving the same index to two entities. This concept is employed in the binding theory to indicate that two noun phrases have a common referent. Now tell me, what's antecedent? What is antecedent?
Antecedent is the noun phrase that is co-indexed with the other noun phrase, which lends its interpretation to the other noun phrase. Now in the sentence, as you can see, Sita hates herself. Sita is co-indexed with herself. So herself is the kind of anaphor which gets its meaning from its antecedent, which is Sita. Now tell me, what makes noun phrase lend its meaning? What is its significance?
Well, the noun phrase and the antecedent must agree with respect to the nominal features of person, number, and gender in order for the NP to lend its meaning. For example, as you can see in the image, Sita hates himself is not a correct statement because himself does not agree in person, number, and gender with its antecedent, which is Sita. Now, tell me, what is governing category?
Well, the governing category refers to the binding domain which contains X. Now, X here is an anaphor, pronoun, or R expression. It can either be anaphor, pronoun, or R expression. The governor of X and the antecedent. So the binding domain has these things. Now these three types of noun phrases have features. Reciprocals and reflexives are plus anaphor minus pronominal. Reflexives and reciprocals, they are anaphoric in nature, so plus anaphor minus pronominal, no pronouns. And pronouns are minus anaphoric plus pronominal. Our expressions are minus pronominal minus anaphoric. Now tell me about the last feature complex, which is plus anaphor plus pronominal.
Plus anaphor plus pronominal will have to satisfy two contrary conditions, as it is both anaphoric and pronominal. So the two contrary conditions, the first says that it should be bound in its governing category, and the second condition is that it should be free in its governing category. Bound talks about the anaphor, the principle A. Principle A talks about the anaphor, so anaphors must be bound in their governing domain, and B, the second condition, talks about pronominals like pronouns, and pronouns, the principle B states that the pronouns must be free in their governing domain. Now tell me ahead.
Good, yeah, that's correct. Now there are these two contrary conditions. It should be bound and be free in its governing category. So that's it. Now, for any constituent having a governor can never satisfy both the conditions simultaneously. This paradox is solved if candidate has no governor. However, the case filter leaves out the possibility of the occurrence of any overt noun phrases without governor. Hence, big pro, the non-overt subject of the non-finite clause, occupies the ungoverned position, and hence the last feature complex, which is plus anaphor plus pronominal, coincides with big pro.
Let's talk about movements now. So movements, as you know, are classified into A movement, A bar movement, and head movement. Tell me about A movement now.
So A movement is the movement of a DP to an argument position from subject or the complement position to another subject or complement position. That's A movement. DP movements are triggered by passive verbs and raising verbs. Now tell me, where does DP occur in a passive sentence?
About the passive sentence, the occurrence of DP. So typically in a passive sentence, it occurs in the object position and moves to the subject position. The subject position is empty since passive verbs do not have external theta role to assign. So they do not have the capacity to assign theta role. Now tell me, what are the true properties of passive verbs in English?
Well, the true properties, the first is that they fail to assign structural case to the complement noun phrase. Thus, this noun phrase has to move in a position where it can get case. The second property is that they do not take an external argument as they absorb the theta role specified for it. This leaves the subject position empty. Thus, the deep structure of the passive looks like space, verb, noun phrase. Now, tell me how did Bourdieu generalize this?
So Bourdieu's generalization, the first was that he said that a verb which lacks an external theta role fails to assign accusative case. The verb which lacks an external theta role fails to assign accusative case. The second thing he said was that a verb which fails to assign accusative case fails to theta mark an external argument. Now tell me an example of raising verb that fails to assign structural case and lacks an external argument. An example of such a raising verb which fails to assign structural case and lacks an external theta role.
Well, that's seem. Seem is a raising verb which fails to assign structural case and lacks external theta role. It seems to mean, it seems as if, it seems. These are the examples. Now tell me about A bar movement.
About the A bar movement, so it refers to the movement of maximal projections into A bar position or non-argument position. Give me an example of A bar movement now.
An example of A bar movement is, well, the kind of operator movement in which in the WH quotients, wherein WH moves through the spec of the CP. This is an A bar position, spec of the CP. Now tell me, what is scrambling treated as?
Scrambling is treated as an A bar movement. Now tell me what is head movement?
Head movement, it involves the movement of heads of the phrases, as in I smaller than C. The subject auxiliary inversion, and I smaller than V. That is the affix lowering. As you can see in this image. Now tell me, what's a non-overt noun phrase that's plus pronominal minus anaphor? Plus pronominal plus anaphor. A non-overt noun phrase.
I just told you that's the big pro. The big pro is plus pronominal plus anaphor. Now tell me overt noun phrase that's plus pronominal minus anaphor. What is it? An overt noun phrase which is plus pronominal minus anaphor.
That's pronoun. Pronoun is plus pronominal minus anaphor. Now tell me non-overt noun phrase which is plus pronominal minus anaphor. a non-overt noun phrase which is plus pronominal minus anaphor. What is it?
That is small pro. Small pro is the non-overt noun phrase which is plus pronominal minus anaphor. So that's small pro. Now tell me, an overt noun phrase that is plus anaphoric and minus pronominal. Plus anaphoric minus pronominal, and it is an overt noun phrase. What is it?
Well, that's anaphor. Anaphor is an overt noun phrase which is plus anaphoric and minus pronominal. Now tell me, a non-overt noun phrase which is plus anaphoric and minus pronominal. A non-overt noun phrase.
That is NP trace. NP trace is a non-overt noun phrase which is plus anaphoric and minus pronominal. Now tell me, an overt noun phrase which is minus pronominal minus anaphoric. What is it? And so remember, it's an overt noun phrase which is minus anaphoric and minus pronominal. What is it? What is this kind of overt noun phrase called?
That's the R expressions. R expressions are the overt noun phrases that are minus pronominal minus anaphoric. Now tell me, what are the non-overt noun phrases which are minus pronominal minus anaphoric? Non-overt noun phrase.
That's WH trace. WH traces are the kind of non-overt noun phrases that are minus pronominal and minus anaphoric at the same time. Now tell me, tell me about the bounding theory. What is bounding theory?
Well, the bounding theory defines the boundaries for movement. Boundaries for movement is defined by the bounding theory. Tell me, what's the main condition that is involved in the bounding theory?
Well, the main condition that is involved in the bounding theory is that the movements cannot cross more than one bounding node. The main condition in the bounding theory is that movements cannot cross more than one bounding node. Now tell me, what is this condition wherein movements cannot cross more than one bounding node? So what is this condition termed as?
That's the subjacency condition. The subjacency condition states that movements cannot cross more than one bounding node. Now tell me an example of the bounding node. Tell me, what are bounding nodes? What can act as bounding nodes?
Well, they can be CP, IP, NP or DP. These can act as bounding nodes. Now tell me, which parameter selects bounding nodes for a particular language? What is that one parameter which selects the bounding nodes for a particular language?
Well, it's the subjacency parameter. Subjacency parameter selects the bounding nodes for a particular language. Now, I have an assertion. Tell me if it is correct or incorrect. So, in English, IP and NP behave as bounding nodes, and hence no movement can cross two IPs or two NPs/DPs or one IP and one NP or DP in a single leap or bound. Is that a correct statement?
That's correct. In English, IP and NP act as bounding nodes and cannot jump two IPs or two NPs or an IP and an NP at once. Now tell me if this assertion is correct or is it incorrect. So in Italian, CP and NP or DP So CP and NP behave as bounding nodes. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, that's correct. In Italian, CP and NP behave as bounding nodes. Now tell me if this assertion is correct. So structure preserving principle constraint restrains movement of the constituents and requires the movements to preserve the structure that was established at the deep structure in the surface structure. Is that a correct statement about the structure preserving principle constraint? That it restrains movement of the constituents and requires the movements to preserve the structure which was established at the deep structure in the surface structure.
Yeah, that's correct. Now, tell me if this assertion is correct. So, phrasal projections are allowed to move into positions which are themselves labeled as phrasal projections, because structure preserving principle constraint restrains the movement of constituents and requires the movements to preserve the structure which was established at the deep structure in the surface structure. Is that a correct assertion about phrasal projections which are allowed to move only into positions which are themselves labeled as phrasal projections?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct about the phrasal projections. Phrasal projections are allowed to move into positions which themselves are labeled as phrasal projections because the structure preserving principle constraint restrains the movement of constituents and requires the movements to preserve the structure established at the deep structure in the surface structure. That's correct. Now tell me, movement of heads is not restricted to the head positions only due to the SPP constraint. Is that correct? That movement of heads is not just restricted to the head positions due to the SPP constraint.
No, that's not correct. The movement of heads is indeed restricted to the head positions only due to the SPP constraint. So that's not a correct assertion. The constituent belonging to the category A are forbade to move into the position of category B. For example, noun phrase cannot move to adjective phrase. Is this due to the SPP constraint?
Yeah, that's correct. Constituent belonging to category A cannot move to the position of category B. For example, a noun phrase cannot move to an adjective phrase, and that is due to the structure preserving principle constraint. That's correct. Now tell me, what is complex noun phrase constraint?
The complex noun phrase constraint. It says that the NP whose N, or the noun, the category, the node N takes a sentential complement is termed as a complex noun phrase. For example, the girl with the red umbrella is my cousin. So that's an example of a complex noun phrase constraint. Now tell me, who proposed the complex noun phrase constraint, the structure preserving principle constraint? Who proposed these constraints?
It was Ross. It was Ross who proposed these constraints: the structure preserving principle constraint, complex noun phrase constraint, and a few others like coordinate structure constraint. Now tell me, what did he say about the complex noun phrase constraint?
About the complex noun phrase constraint, Ross said that movement out of the complex noun phrase is not allowed, and they act as an island for movement. So this was the complex noun phrase, as you can see. Now tell me, what is the coordinate structure constraint?
About the coordinate structure constraint, so the first thing is that there are there are structures, different structures which are combined together to form a single structure with the help of coordinating conjunctions like but, and, or. So this new structure is called the coordinate structure, and it is not possible to extract any element out of a coordinate structure, and that is the reason why this becomes a constraint now. So that's the coordinate structure constraint, and they act as islands because nothing can be extracted out of a coordinate structure. Now tell me about WH islands. What did Ross claim about the WH islands?
Well, WH islands WH islands are the embedded CP introduced by WH constituents in a sentence, and Ross said that extraction of an element out of such a constituent is not possible. So that's a WH island because nothing can be extracted out of such a constituent. Now let's talk about generative semantics. So tell me, who in the 1970s were mostly these people were mostly the students of Chomsky and were dissatisfied with the representation of meaning in Chomsky's generative syntax model. So who were these students? Tell me the names of such students who were dissatisfied with the representation of meaning in the generative syntax model of Chomsky.
Paul Postel, George Lakoff, Haj Ross, and James Macaulay. These were against the representation of meaning in the Chomsky's generative syntax model. Now tell me, what did these people do?
They abandoned the notion of deep structure, which was at the heart of the generative syntax. Now, tell me, what was this replaced by? What was the deep structure replaced by?
Well, it was replaced by the semantic representations. And tell me, what were these representations, the semantic representations, like?
So these representations were like trees in the generative semantics program. Now I have an assertion. Tell me if it is correct or incorrect. So both generative syntax and generative semantics acknowledge the relation between sound and meaning. However, the difference is between the descriptive tools that they have adopted to represent it in a theory. Is that a correct assertion?
Yeah, that's correct. Both generative syntax and semantics acknowledge the relation between sound and meaning. The difference is between the descriptive tools that they have adopted to represent it in a theory. That's correct. Now tell me, who authored the grammar of English nominalizations?
Well, it was Robert Lees. Robert Lees authored the grammar of English nominalizations. Now, tell me, what did he propose here? What did he propose in this work?
Well, he said that a wide range of English nominalizations can be seen as a derivation from the underlying verbs. So, in English, lots of names or nominalizations happen as a result of the derivation from the underlying verbs. Now tell me, what did this proposal initiate?
Well, this proposal initiated the category reduction work, that is, the reduction of deep lexical categories to nouns and verbs. Now tell me, what did the category reduction, this work, what did it claim?
Well, the category reduction work claimed that everything else is derived transformationally. So all of the grammatical happenings happen transformationally. All that is left to the deep structure is the lexical categories, and everything else apart from the lexical categories is derived transformationally. That is what the category reduction work claimed. Now tell me, what did this act as a central tenet for?
Well, the claim that everything else is derived transformationally, this acted as a central tenet for generative semantics. Now tell me, who abandoned this claim and in which work did he abandon this claim?
Well, it was Chomsky. Chomsky, in the year 1970, in his work Lexicalist Hypothesis, abandoned this claim of generative semantics, wherein they said that everything else was derived transformationally, leaving apart the lexical categories.
That's correct. And to add to your statement, well, the lexicalist hypothesis in 1970, it denied transformation's rights to change the syntactic category and refused the nouns to be derived transformationally from underlying verbs. Instead, what it did is that he said that they are, the nouns are represented in the lexicon already. So this shattered the basement on which generative semantics was built.